What do you think about, so I'm fielding a little bit of questions from chat. So what do you think about like ISIS expansion into places like Southeast Asia, like Indonesia and whatnot? Do you think these are things to be concerned about for the future, or?
Well, let me show you something. Hang on a second here. I wrote this book back in 2016 called The Lesser Jihads. It's all about the ISIS affiliates around the world. And I got bad news for your listeners. Despite the president's claim that ISIS had been defeated in 2019, it's maybe not as strong as it was back in 2014 when it created the caliphate. But I do follow news on a daily basis in that part of the world. There are daily attacks by ISIS against Iraqi and Syrian forces. There are at least 20 ISIS affiliates around the world. Some of them are very strong. I don't know if you heard the news just this last week, where an ISIS affiliate in Mozambique, of all cases, on the southeast coast of Africa.
Somebody in chat specifically asked about, the Mozambique thing,
Beheaded 50 villagers. This is an ISIS wannabe affiliate. So the affiliates are doing very well. There's an ISIS affiliate in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's ISIS affiliates in the Sahel, in Nigeria, in Southeast Asia, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, et cetera, one in Yemen. There's that. And then there's, with the Vienna attack last week, there's the wannabes. There's the guys that are, probably can't spell ISIS, but are doing things in ISIS's name. And then ISIS says, yeah, that was our guy. These guys, they didn't know this guy from Adam yesterday, but when he does something like what happened in Vienna or what happened in Nice or what happened in Paris, ISIS says, yeah, we inspired the guy to do so. And that they probably actually did through their propaganda. Bottom line is that, so when we talk about terrorist groups, we used to talk about it on three different levels. There's the core, so core Al-Qaeda, core ISIS, etc. There's the affiliates. It's like ISIS in Mozambique, ISIS in Nigeria, etc. Then there's the third level, which are the kind of the lone actors,
inspired
the wannabes.
by people, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the bad news is that on all three levels, Islamic State is doing very, very, very well.
Where do they get their funding from now? My understanding is that initially it was like
funding for what? The guy who beheads a teacher in Paris, he goes into his kitchen and gets a butcher knife and he cuts the guy's head off. The kid in Vienna, he got out of jail, got access to a firearm and started shooting people. I mean, what does that cost?
Yeah, so
like
nothing, right? third tier and second tier, I can understand not requiring funding, but it seems like the core group needs some type of money to stay alive and to coordinate like with large groups of people, whatever. And my understanding is that most of that money came from like Syria, like running those oil fields and selling it up in Turkey.
It was oil fields. It was actually, they did a lucrative business in stolen art. And stolen artifacts like antiquities. Okay. So obviously a lot of that's been cut off. So I don't actually know where the funding is coming from. Clearly they're able to operate on the ground. I would think that part of the equation is the fact that weapons are easy to get in that part of the world. So the weapon part, you don't have to get weapons shipped from Russia or whatever. They're basically lying on the ground to be able to use.
Sure.
In terms of everything else, this is one of the misnomers about terrorism. Terrorism's not expensive most of the time. 9/11 is kind of your odd person out, because 9/11 is a huge operation. What ISIS and what Islamic State's been doing over the past couple of years is something, what I call it, it's called the Nike model of terrorism. Like, just do it. You don't expect a check from us. Don't expect instructions from us. Don't expect guidance from us. Just do it, and pick up a knife, get in a car, like the guys in Barcelona, driving down the street in Barcelona, taking out 20 people out for a Friday, whatever it was, evening stroll. So terrorism is not an expensive operation for the most part. So yes, the core guys got to figure out where the money's coming from. They're obviously getting it from somewhere because, as I said, if you read the Iraqi news or the Syrian news on a daily basis, there's at least one attack every couple of days. So clearly they're not defeated. Let's put it that way.
Well, do you have anything else you want to chat about?
Yeah, we talked about Iran a little bit, right? I'd like to get back to Iran for a little bit.
Did we talk after the killing of Soleimani, or?
No. Just earlier on, we talked about the nuclear accord.
Oh, right? The joint plan of.
The joint whatever the hell it's called, JCO, whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah.
So before I was a specialist in Islamist extremism, I was actually an Iranian analyst. I was fluent in Farsi. I studied Iran for 20 years, so I have a really good knowledge of what makes Iran tick. And my humble opinion, and there are many who will disagree with me, is that, and for understandable reasons, we have seen Iran as like the boogeyman since 1979. Well, no shit, Sherlock. They took your embassy over in Tehran and kept, 54 people hostage for 444 days. There's one way to piss off a state. They certainly aren't helpful in the region. They sponsor militias in Iraq. They sponsor Hezbollah in
and
Syria.
everywhere, Hamas, and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So they're a pain in the ass kind of thing. But we've painted Iran as being the sort of the most dangerous terrorist threat in the world. And I think if you look at the numbers in terms of what's actually been happening over the past 20 to 30 years, you look at the number of actual attacks that have been carried out by terrorists, you look at the victims, numbers of fatalities, so numbers of wounded and killed, and you add it all up, what you'll find out is that 99.9% of those attacks and fatalities were caused by Sunni Islamist extremists. The Iranians are Shia Islamist extremists, and the two can't stand each other. So when people say that Iran is the problem, they are a problem. They're not the problem, because it's the Sunnis, many of whom are basically, we were sort of, suckled at the Saudi teat in terms of Wahhabi ideology. They're the terrorists that have been causing us problems for the past 40 years. And yet we paint Iran as sort of the bad man that we have to sort of corner. And again, I'm not an apologist for the Iranians.
Yeah,
right?
There's a difference between like our publicly, what we talk about is dealing with terrorism, but in terms of the government, I don't know if the government actually cares about terrorism that much, because I don't know how much that impacts us. But geopolitically, Shia-affiliated people, the Ayatollah and all of that, people like Iran and Syria and maybe Iraq coming soon, are going to be more thorns on our side than any of the Sunnis are, right? Because we're friends with the Sunni states and we kind of like them for the most part.
No, I get that. You're right. Yeah. I get that. Right.
So like Saudi Arabia might sponsor more terrorism, but Iran is sponsoring terrorism against states that we care about, whereas Sunni extremism, Yeah.
But I do think that the nuclear accord that the Obama administration got the Iranians to sign was actually a very, very good deal. And I think when Trump threw it out on, was it day 2 of his administration, that was just spite. I mean, he was going to undo everything Obama did, right? I mean, the healthcare system, all that kind of whatever Obama signed, Trump didn't like. So it didn't matter whether it was good or bad or indifferent. It was thrown out kind of thing. My understanding is that the Biden administration is going to renegotiate that treaty with the Iranians shortly after taking office in January.
Yeah,
that to me is good. I think Iran's under a lot of pressure right now. Iran has also suffered from COVID at astronomical levels on a per capita basis. So they're in a very weakened position.
Yeah, we don't talk about it, but there was a lot of their leadership, I think, or a lot of like high people ended up getting infected and I think even dying in Iran's government.
Yeah. So the time right now to negotiate with the Iranians is ripe. And I think the Biden administration gets that. So I think that whatever the renewed accord is going to be called, what it's going to look like, will be an even better accord with the Iranians. And the first one was pretty damn good based on what, and I'm not a nuclear expert by any stretch of the imagination, but experts were saying this is a really good thing for us to do. And yet it was thrown out. And the Iranians basically said, well, fuck you. If you're not going to honor your agreements, then why would we? Like, why wouldn't we just keep pursuing nuclear weapons?
Initially
right?
it was.
So I think
I hope that all the recent stuff, I mean, because you got to figure we killed Soleimani, who's like an Iranian celebrity. I'm not going to say it's our fault, but they shot down that plane on accident that was flying, that took off over Tehran, and that went down and everybody was killed. I know that we had the limpet mines going on. And then we had I think Iran attacked a Saudi refinery. I think it was a drone attack, wasn't it? So
I've heard that,
yeah. I think things are chill now, but they were spiking up for a little bit. We forget.
But ask yourself this, right? I mean, Soleimani was killed way back in January, right? I mean, how much of a real serious level or serious degree has happened since that time? And there's a lot happening in the background. I mean, when you work in Intel, you learn about all kinds of things that don't make the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. But you haven't seen this spike in really serious stuff since that time.
For sure.
Which leads you to question: is it really that bad? And my answer is that I'm not entirely certain it is. To give you an analogy, you probably read in the days following the election in November, you'd see a spike in right-wing terrorism in your country, right? All these right-wing nut jobs, the white nationalists, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, the blah, 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 the militias, who wouldn't accept the result, were convinced by their commander-in-chief that it was a stolen election. You would see a spike in violence against polling stations, whatever kind of thing.
Yeah.
Can you name me one single attack that's happened since the elections in your country?
Nope.
There
However,
are a few arrests.
Sure. I don't know if it's for lack of desire or just for lack of resources. With maybe the coronavirus slowed everything down. I mean, I hope that what you're saying is correct. That like Iran that's just what is it, like water off the back or something? It's just whatever, and they don't care that much. It seems hard to believe, but maybe they don't, and then we can kind of move forward in a positive way. But yeah.
but they're also in trouble economically. And I think that, you've got, the Iranians themselves would embrace a deal tomorrow. The uppity ups, the Ayatollahs would not, but the Ayatollahs reckon, maybe they don't care because they're the ones that are being fed and clothed kind of thing. But the economy is in the shitter.
Yeah, I've heard
soon.
The sanctions have a massively negative impact.
What
is the motivation for the United States to engage in some type of deal with them, though, rather than wait for the country to collapse and then try to support a new leader, like almost like a coup, like supporting a new leader that steps in instead that's more loyal to U.S.
You could do that. The problem is if you wait, what if what you get in the aftermath is worse than what you have right now? Why not deal with a partner that is severely weakened and would probably sign a deal just to get some kind of relief from the sanctions and do things it wouldn't normally do? Whereas if you let things sort of happen naturally, do you have any idea who's going to come next? Is it going to be a better person? Is it going to be a worse person? I mean, I don't think we don't have crystal balls, right? And I don't think that we can rely on the fact that, well, since most Iranians want to actually do a deal with the West and see the West as actually a model as opposed to the other neighbors, there's no guarantee that's going to happen that way.
I mean, I agree and I understand, but it seems like in the past, with people like Hussein or Gaddafi, it seems like we were willing to just kind of roll the dice on these people and see.
Well, and where did that get us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at Libya right now. It's a shithole.
Yeah.
Look at Iraq's a shithole. I mean, it seems to me that there's enough of an importance around this particular deal with the Iranians that I think the Biden administration will actually go forward, knowing it's negotiating from an extreme position of strength with the Iranians, and that it'll get a lot of concessions from Iran that it maybe wouldn't have gotten a couple of years ago. So to me, it's you strike when the iron's hot, and the iron is really, really hot in Iran right now. So I would do it if I was the Biden administration.
Gotcha. Yeah, I hope so. Speaking around all of this, so one of our prime drivers in the Middle East, what do you think about Putin stepping down soon?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, I mean, he's going to do that, right? I mean, we're faced with this really interesting phenomenon, and you have these leaders that have convinced themselves that their shit doesn't stink, and that no one else could do what they're doing. So Putin will be empowered to what, 2035, I hear, he'll hold power. You're seeing this in a lot of African countries now in the wake of elections, is that all these countries have 2-term limits, like you guys do, 2-term limits, right? Well, if this guy gets elected for the second time, all of a sudden the Constitution miraculously changes overnight, and all the term limits are thrown out. So we're at the
Morales' party in Bolivia, right? Try this as well.
Yeah. Erdogan in Turkey. I think we're faced with this phenomenon where these strong men have this thirst and this lust for power, and there's no goddamn way they're going to give up on it. There's no way that they're going to let someone else run the show. And so, I mean, Putin's part of that. Erdogan's part of that. A lot of the African presidents / dictators are part of that. I mean, Modi in India is showing some really worrying signs of Hindu extremism. Now, albeit, I mean, India is a democracy, and they have voted him in. Just recently got reelected a vast majority. But a lot of what he's doing is raising a lot of eyebrows too, in terms of kowtowing to some really nasty Hindu terrorists and Hindu extremists in India. But that just seems to be the flavor of the day right now. Is these people they're just convinced that it's my way or the highway, and my way is the best way, and I'm not going to step down anytime soon.
Okay, this guy's spamming this question a ton. How do you feel about the Hawaii? I'm butchering the pronunciation as I read this. Huawei, yeah. Executive was detained in Canada, and then the 2 Canadians that were arrested in China in retaliation for it.
Yeah. But it's funny the question comes up because I just did a seminar or webinar this morning with somebody. We were looking at Chinese technology. Okay, there's no other easier way to say that. China is not our friend. They're not your friend. They're not our friend here in Canada. They're not our friend in the West. They are an aggressive power that is antithetical to everything that we stand for. We have basically sucked at the Chinese economic teat now for the better part of 30 or 40 years. Everything that we do is made in China because it's cheaper. They can do it at vast economic savings by doing it there. And as a result, we've basically allowed China to dominate a lot of markets, including our telecommunications market. And yet when you see what's happening within China, I'm not just talking about what they're doing in Tibet, what they're doing in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, but their policy is basically to become the world power on a whole bunch of different levels. And part of that is by selling us our technology. And anybody that thinks that they're not going to use Huawei to their advantage is completely unreal, and it's completely naive. Now, unfortunately, what they did in Canada when we arrested Meng Wanzhou, who's the chief financial officer of Huawei, at the Trump administration's behest, by the way, they took 2 Canadians and have been held in solitary for the better part of 2 years, or even longer, I think. So, we're being held hostage to Chinese foreign and domestic policy. But speaking as an old Intel guy, why in heaven's name would you allow the backbone of your 5G telecommunication system to rest in the hands of China? Like, why can't we use Nokia, the Finns, or why don't we use Siemens, or why don't we use, some Western technology firm that's at least friendly to us, as opposed to a power that stands for everything that we're against? Makes no sense to me. So this standoff between Canada and China, it just keeps going on and on and on. And at least my government finally seems to be getting the message, because the intelligence services have been telling the government for 20 years that China's up to this. The latest report just came out just this week about China essentially harassing Canadian Chinese who are speaking out against Hong Kong, or speaking out against. I've met some Uyghur Canadians who basically have been threatened by Chinese agents saying, "Shut your pie hole," or "Your uncle back home, I get it," kind of thing. They've been doing that for decades, and we've been telling the government that for decades. But because of the economic relationship and the trade relationship, the government chose to ignore it. I'm hoping now, and I'm cautiously optimistic, that people in power finally realize, hey, we've been led down the garden path by the Chinese. This has got to stop. This has got to stop now.
I'm a huge. Have you ever heard the term doomer?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I'm a very big doomer when it comes to China. I feel like China's going to lead the world in most things in the next 10 or 20 years. Yeah.
They already are. Yeah.
The thing that
the economic trends are such that even they're going to surpass you guys in terms of economic GDP and economic output.
It sucks because I don't know if I complain about this general trend to you, but it seems like when people get scared and when bad things happen, people tend to look inward. And it feels like China over the past 20 years has only been looking outward. So while the rest of the world is kind of like creeping up and getting scared and not wanting to talk with or trade with or be part of the European Union if you're the UK, or be part of NATO or whatever, everybody's kind of scared. And China is just like getting their hands into everything. And I feel like China is like a country that is of such a size, in order to adequately stand up to them, not military. We're not talking about military, but like soft power, right? In order to stand up to them, you need these huge unified bodies, these big multilateral trade agreements. But everybody views that as being weak now, which is very frustrating.
You're probably familiar with what they call the Belt Road Initiative, the Chinese. They're building infrastructure around the world. And they're building dams and power plants, all kinds of stuff.
And all the ports where they lend you the money to do it that they know you can't pay back, so that they can take ownership of it afterwards. Yeah, it's so smart.
They know these countries can't pay back.
Yeah,
there's a famous case in Sri Lanka. They built a port in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankans don't have a pot to piss in. And so guess who owns the port? Well, isn't that convenient that China has a deep water port in Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean?
And they have the agreement set up such that it's their workers that get to work on it. It's all of their it's incredible.
So there's no local economic benefit. There's no trickle down effect to local economy. It's all foreign workers, and it's all for China's benefit. And yet they parade themselves as being an international partner. Look what we're doing. We're building coal plants in Pakistan. We're building ports in Sri Lanka. We're building oil plants in Ethiopia. Aren't we a good international player? No, you're not. You're doing it for your own projection of strength. Well, what you're doing.
It sucks too, because if the U.S. was to do any of this, I'm pretty sure our own population would call our leaders weak. If the United States was going around lending money for people to like build ports and then they couldn't pay, we'd be like, oh, Trump would be saying like, what a bad deal. Like, we got ripped off there. They couldn't pay us back. Like, we need to leave. And it's like, it kills me.
And yet we've been standing back and watching this happen. And part of it, especially over the past 4 years, has been the lack of U.S. leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had a stronger president who actually cared about foreign relations and cared about foreign alliances, the Chinese probably would not have been aggressive. Because A, Trump seemed to have some kind of love affair with Xi Jinping in the first place, and B, he could give a shit at what happens outside the borders. So China says, check mark. We can do what we want because Trump likes our leader. And secondly, he's not going to lift a finger to stop us. Now, there's been some noises recently about, maybe a little bit of pushback, but kind of 4 years too late, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
There's one thing I do want to raise, is what's happening now in Afghanistan. And Trump has been big about the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, about the peace talks in Doha, in Qatar.
I don't think we've withdrawn troops from any. I think we still have troops in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But I know he's talked about it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, he has. And see, this is where this is kind of a two-edged sword. So one of the problems is that when you send your soldiers abroad and you essentially occupy another country to some extent in a counterterrorism campaign. So think what happened after 9/11, right? You guys went in, the Canadians went in, NATO went in a big way to find Al-Qaeda, to find bin Laden, and to bring the people who caused 9/11 to justice. So that was a counterterrorism campaign. Mm-hmm. We're still there 20 years later. And the problem is when you stay there that long is you cause a lot of anger on the ground because, military strikes, drone strikes go awry, civilians get killed, you're eating up too much of the economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So being there actually causes more problems than you're probably solving. Mm-hmm. Afghanistan is not safer today than it was on 9/11. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Afghan news, which on a daily basis, the violence is up 50% over the past 3 months. And these are Taliban attacks on Afghan civilians and on Afghan military. The Taliban is the main so-called peace partner in these talks. Mm-hmm. And I've said, and many others have said, so hang on a second here. The terrorist group that sheltered bin Laden and allowed him to carry out 9/11 is now your peace partner in Afghanistan. And we know that, if the United States withdraws its troops, the Afghan government cannot control the country by itself. The Taliban will become the functioning government of Afghanistan. And we also know from what we see in open source that the Taliban still work with Al-Qaeda. So what will have changed after 20 years of occupation?
Yeah, well, we have to negotiate with the Taliban, not because it's what we wanted to do, but because we failed in Afghanistan.
Because it's the only one. Yeah. So, but you see, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? And I'm not saying that troop withdrawal is not a good thing. It is a good thing because eventually you have to cut bait. Mm-hmm. Because Afghanistan's not much safer. The problem is that once you leave, it's probably going to get much worse. So in 5 years' time, do we ramp up troops again and go to Afghanistan because there's been another terrorist attack planned and executed out of Afghanistan on Western targets? See,
I think it feels like the problem, especially in lieu of the Afghanistan papers, the problem it always feels like with recent foreign policy in the Middle East is even privately, it feels like there's not a clear mission objective sometimes. No. That lack of mission objective, like we have enough military might, I imagine, to do almost anything. We probably blow up the moon if we wanted to. But if we don't have like a clear objective and nobody really knows what's going on and we're just pouring, man, some of the reports on how much money we were just like, I think somebody would be assigned to like a 5x5 house block and they'd be given like $10 million a week to spend, like spend it somewhere. And it's like, Jesus, I don't know. Like that was insane. Yeah.
No, you're right. There wasn't. The only plan was to locate bin Laden and bring him to justice, and it took us 10 years to do that, right?
And it wasn't even Afghanistan; it was in Pakistan.
It was Pakistan, I know. But so this is just my point: is that the other book that I wrote after Lesser Jihad was called "An End to the War on Terrorism." Mm-hmm. We have to stop seeing this as a war on terrorism. There has to be a better way to prosecute counterterrorism operations. Mm-hmm. And I've said, and my bias showing is that you want your security intelligence and law enforcement agencies to be at the pointy end of the stick. The military has a role to play, but it can't be the only role out there. And as someone very wisely said after 9/11, whatever you do, don't declare a war against the common noun, because those don't end very well. Right?
Yeah, you'll fight those wars forever. Yeah, the war on drugs. None of these wars. We lost the war on drugs. We're legalizing marijuana across the U.S. We lost the war on poverty. I go outside. I'm in L.A. I see it everywhere. It's a really stupid way of.
So I both understand and I can criticize this move to withdraw troops because it really is a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. Bottom line, Stephen, is that Afghanistan is going to remain a very, very violent place for a very long time, and it's the only country I can think of where terrorism poses an existential threat. No other country I can think of. It's larger and smaller.
I'm curious, when you say terrorism poses an existential threat, do you include do you include like do you include the Taliban in that? Like,
I do because they are a terrorist group.
Isn't it a little bit different? I might be showing my
sense,
but isn't the Taliban like? Don't they have legitimate claim? Okay, hold on. I'm about to make some potentially very, very bad comparisons. Tell me, correct me if I'm wrong. But so you have like the Kurdish regional government, the KRG in Iraq, right? Where they have like a decent claim to being there. They've been there a long time. They have their own region. Doesn't the Taliban, I'm not saying the Kurds are terrorists, but doesn't the Taliban have kind of like a similar claim in terms of its existence in Afghanistan, where they can claim like we've been here for a long time, like this is our land, like we ought to be able to run some of this the way the KRG does in Iraq, or?
Yeah, yes and no. Mm-hmm. So yes, in the sense that they are obviously, they are Afghans and they've been there for a very long time. The problem is twofold. One is that the system of governance that they're going to impose, we saw that in the early 90s, right? Mm-hmm. Girls can't go to school, women don't have rights. Yeah, it was absolute heinous crimes against the Afghan people. And some might say, well, that's Afghanistan. I mean, the Taliban are, conservative Muslims, and they're going to run the show the way they want. And maybe you can make the argument. The other problem is that the Taliban, in fact, have and still are housing Al-Qaeda. There's an Islamic State affiliate in eastern Afghanistan that doesn't necessarily get along with the Taliban, but the ethos and the ideologies that Islamist extremist groups have are consistent with what the Taliban wants to do as well. So the Taliban may not be carrying out acts of terrorism against the United States, Canada, the West, whatever kind of thing, but they're going to be either turning a blind eye to or actively encouraging and assisting other groups that will. That's why I would call it a terrorist regime, in that they are not going to do anything to thwart or to undermine or stop. I mean, they made the promises that they wouldn't allow Al-Qaeda to, gain a resurgence if the peace talks succeed and the Americans get out. That's complete bullshit. There's already open source intelligence that shows they're working with they haven't worked with Al-Qaeda since 9/11. Nothing's changed. So why would we expect in the aftermath of a withdrawal that the Taliban are going to change their spots and all of a sudden become something that we can work with? I don't see that.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I'm not sure how they would function if they.
Let alone the Afghan people having to live under the Taliban regime again. And again, maybe that's not my thing to say or your thing to say as Americans and Canadians.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But do we really want, to subject the Afghans to that kind of rule? We saw what happened when the Taliban were running the show, right? Yeah. And maybe it's out of our business,
I guess
right?
I don't know. It's rough because it feels like if we were to levy that same criticism, everything in the Middle East is so messy, but we could levy that exact same criticism theoretically at Turkey as well, right? Like
we can.
Yeah, but when in 2013 onward, when ISIS was running those oil fields, those trucks were driving right on north to Turkey, and that's exactly where they're selling things. And then love them or hate them, when Russian planes were flying down to bomb ISIS installations and whatnot, Turkey was shooting those planes out of the sky.
That's the problem with foreign policy, right? Is that you got to get to the point where you don't agree with what's happening in country X, Y, or Z, but invading that country and changing it by force, like what happened in 2003 in Iraq. How did that one go, right? With the removal of Saddam Hussein.
Well, the removal was pretty good and easy, but everything
but the aftermath
really
wasn't very great, right? So I think when you're a foreign policy advisor, you have to sort of weigh these things. Is that, yes, we don't like what's happening in Turkey, we don't like what's happening in Russia, we don't like what's happening in Afghanistan, whatever kind of thing. But do we really want to change it by force? Because it's the old pottery barn rule, right? If you break it, you own it. And that's what happened in Iraq. That's what happened in Afghanistan. So I'm not saying there are easy solutions. There are no easy solutions to any of this stuff. And I get really ticked when I hear these so-called experts say, well, just do this. Just do this. No, you just can't just do this, because there are costs to this, and there are repercussions to this. And all this stuff is really complicated. I mean, life is complicated. And there are a million different factors that come to play on any given thing. So I just wish we'd recognize that these things are really, really hard. And posing or proposing simplistic solutions to them never seems to work out. So maybe we should just stop doing that.
Yeah. It's foreign policy is rough. Middle East sucks.
That's the conclusion to our conversation, is it?
Yeah. Let's see. Going forward, we've got the coronavirus vaccine, which hope to God comes out soon, because clearly we cannot manage ourselves otherwise. Do you see Macron's comments spurring on any sort of...
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised that. This has been really interesting. So just to give your listeners some context, the French security services, so the domestic security service, has identified somewhere between 18 and 20,000 French citizens who they worry about. These are radicalized French citizens who have drunk the ISIS Al-Qaeda Kool-Aid. Okay, they're Islamist extremists. No security service can monitor 18 to 20,000 people.
Sure.
Now, having said that, when I worked in intelligence, you realize that the vast majority of people who talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. Most of them couldn't organize a piss up in a bar, right? So they talk online, they post shit online. They've got no intention or capacity to do something, but a certain percentage do.
Which is unfortunate. Even if it's low, 1% or 0.1% of 20,000 people,
that's right.
100. Or,
and the challenge is which 1%, right? So what you do is you have to kind of look at everybody to determine who are the real McCoys in this bunch and who are the wankers. And that takes time and it takes resources. The other thing is that, so setting extremism aside, which is something every state is expected to put a damper on, there's the ideology that feeds the extremism, that feeds the violence. And this is what Macron's been talking about this Islamism that has been feeding violent extremism. And this is where you're getting into hot water, right? because people conflate Islamism with Islam, and the two are very, very different terms.
Sure.
But, the Turks have given them shit, so the Indonesians have, and the Saudis and everything else. He's got a point, even if it didn't come out very well. The Austrians have the same problem, but the Austrians are positing draconian laws whereby if you're convicted of Islamist extremism, you're in jail forever. Like, we're not going to let you guys out. And this is in the wake of the attack in which the guy got out of jail, right?
Yeah.
He faked it. He faked that he had been de-radicalized in a program. Then he killed all those people in Vienna. So Austria is saying, well, screw you. This isn't going to happen again. So I understand what Macron was saying. I think it was a little bit awkward, but it certainly has been twisted by a lot of people in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, to mean things that it didn't mean. He's got a very valid point in that there are all kinds of preachers, not just in France, but in Canada and all through the EU, all through the Muslim world, who preach this shit and who are encouraging young people to become violent in nature. He's saying this has got to stop. And if it means deporting all these people, they'll deport them. France has no hesitation to deport people. They just put you on a boat and you're gone, kind of thing. And I think what's happened is because France has suffered. I mean, yesterday, was it yesterday? No, it's today. Is the 5th anniversary of the Bataclan attacks, the attacks on the theater. I was actually in France. I left Paris the day the attacks took place. I left in the morning to fly back to Canada. And, 134 people dead. And then you had the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Then you had the attacks, the beheading attacks, and the shootings in Nice. France has got a big, big problem, and they're not sure what quite to do about it. And so this is why I think Macron is really struggling on a policy.
Yeah.
But he has an absolute point when he says it's the preachers are part of the problem. It's not just the kids living in the suburbs with no jobs, no education. It's these guys that go to the mosque and preach this shit every Friday, to basically that, carrying out acts of violence is not only okay, it's actually demanded by your faith. That's the kind of thing that's being preached, and that's what he's trying to stop.
I wish, one thing that frustrates me so much, I almost wish these conversations would all just happen behind closed doors because the public cannot have them. I wish that we could address these issues and be realistic about it without it going so dramatically off to like one side.
Yeah,
like,
you me both.
Yeah, when we talk about there seems to be some problem with certain extremist sects of Islam in certain European countries. But the second you open the door to have that conversation, there are two sides that come out. Either it feels like people go too far off to the left. So I think in Sweden, I think they stopped recording certain statistics related to crimes. And it's like, is that really the way to go forward? Where they wouldn't record either the race or religion. It's like, really? Yeah. But then you have the other people on the right who are like, this is why we need to deport every single Muslim from all of these countries. And they're all radical extremists. It reminds me in the US, on the left, we have, we'll have people talk about Blue Lives Matter. It's just a bunch of conservatives that love police or whatever. And people will say well, every single one of them is a white nationalist terrorist. It's I don't think that's really the case, And it drives me crazy how there's because the problem is that the correct answer, has to account for the pros and cons, right? We need a way to get rid of the extremely radical mosques. We need a way to but we also dramatically need a way to integrate these groups of people into the countries. And you can't integrate a group of people while you're constantly demonizing them and telling them nah, screw you guys, you're all radical extremists. Yeah,
you're preaching to the choir here. My theory of life, Stephen, is very simple. Human society is pendular. We're either way out on the right or way out on the left. We're never in the middle. In the middle is where you want to be, where you can listen to voices on both sides. You can look at the pros and cons. You can acknowledge that both sides have some valid points to make, but the resolution or the best solution is somewhere in the middle. But we're not there. And you're absolutely right. What are the voices that get heard? It's the far left voices and the far right voices that get heard, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the police issue in your country and mine, or systemic racism, which is the term everybody uses nowadays. There are elements to truth to all that stuff, but it doesn't define everybody, on the planet that way. Well, and that's the way it's being presented. And that's where we need that kind of middle ground to say, okay, let's sit down like adults, like rational people, have a debate, put the facts on the table, and come up with solutions. But no, it seems to be it's either all this way or it's all that way, and that way doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, it's more about sloganeering than actually figuring out. Yeah, which is frustrating because I'm pretty sure when it comes to actual core values, I'm pretty sure about 99% of humanity agrees on like 95% of topics. Like most people want to be healthy, have clothes, have food, have a school to send, right? And then like our disagreements are not anywhere near as major as people seem to make them out to be. Like I don't think the average liberal in the United States wants every cop to be killed. And I don't think the average conservative in the United States, wants every single black person thrown into jail for like smoking weed, Yeah, it's...
But unfortunately, the 99.9% are the ones that rule, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
But, well, man, you mentioned that pendulum, and like I said, the whole world is about to have whiplash from moving from Trump to Biden, which is about the farthest right administration or the farthest left administration you can imagine. So,
but it's going to be cool to watch. I think a lot of people. But my concern would be that maybe the expectations are a little bit too high for the Biden administration.
And that's my worry.
So much that has to be changed.
Yeah,
is that how quickly can he change it? He can't do it all on day one.
Especially if there's not a Senate. That's the thing that scares me the most. Is that because if Biden comes in, we're literally expecting on day one a 15 an hour minimum wage, a single payer healthcare program, peace of the fucking Middle East and across the world. Yeah,
rejoin the climate change accord. Blah, blah, blah,
fucking solar panels on every fucking rooftop. It feels like the expectations are just going to be comprehensive immigration reform. Oh man, and everything is going to be a fight. So oof.
It will be. Well, but I mean, hopefully, and I'm being very naive here. I'm being very Pollyannish. Hopefully some of the partisanship will tone down a little bit so that, some of these really good ideas will make it through the Senate and will become, U.S. policy and U.S. law. I mean, I'm a half-class full guy by nature. I'm an optimist as opposed to a pessimist. I'm not naive. I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday, but I'm hopeful that the administration will achieve some good. In the same way the Obama administration did a lot of great things, right? I mean, here's fingers crossed that going forward, that it won't be instantaneous change and there'll be a lot of battles ahead. Interesting to see what your Supreme Court does on a lot of issues, right? Now that it's, a 6-3 conservative versus a liberal kind of bias.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
I mean, who knows, right? It's going to be, it'll be fun to watch if nothing else. It'll be fun to watch in the same way the last 4 years have not been fun to watch. Sure. The last 4 years have been a horror story to watch. These 4 years should be fun. I'm hoping.
Hopefully, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow. All
right. Well, do you have a new book to sell or anything? What's the most recent thing you've been involved in? I want to promote something. I feel bad. I just have you on here.
Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, go for it.
Behind me here. So it's funny. We were talking about Hindu extremism. This is the book that came out last November. It's called When Religion Kills. Is looking at everything, including Islamist extremism. I wanted to ask myself the question, because I looked at jihadis all through my intelligence career. I wrote 4 books on the jihadis. And my question was, there's got to be more people out there that see themselves as religious in nature, but also think that God sanctions them killing people. And so I looked at it, and I wrote this book. It came out in November, actually a year ago. And there's 6 chapters. There's one on Buddhist extremism, which should be an oxymoron, but there are Buddhist extremists in Myanmar, killing the Rohingya, for example. Hindu extremists we talked about. Christian extremists, including some in your country, who use Old Testament verses to justify killing. Jewish extremists, of course, in the West Bank and places like that. Islamist extremism and Sikh extremism, which people keep forgetting about. But the single largest act of terrorism in history prior to 9/11 was the downing of an airliner that was taken out of the sky by 2 Canadian Sikh terrorists in 1985. So Sikh extremism hasn't gone away either. So I wanted to talk about how the fact that because people think that, was it Ann Coulter once said, not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslim?
Well, sounds like a very Ann Coulter thing to say.
Yeah, well, she's full of shit on most things, but she was particularly full of shit on this one because not all terrorists are Muslim. There's all kinds of other terrorists. The other thing I want to leave just before we part, I'm actually just finishing up a book which is probably of less interest to most of your listeners, because I'm guessing most of your listeners are American. But I'm just finishing up a book on the history of terrorism in Canada from my country's birthday, which is 1867, to the present, looking at a variety of different terrorist movements that carried out attacks either in Canada or Canadians who went abroad to commit terrorist acts. So I'm just about finishing that book, and hopefully it will be out in early 2020. I'm probably going to self-publish, so this one might be out in early 2021.
Okay. Sounds interesting. Should be cool. We can chat again then if you want to promote the book or anything.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah. No, it's been great to talk to you again. And we should have these conversations regularly, because you've raised a lot of really interesting questions about a lot of things. And it's nice to have a conversation where we're getting different views out there on things. Like you said, if we could only get to that middle part of the pendulum, we'd be a lot better off, I think, as people, not just in the United States and Canada, but all over the planet. So
yeah, something that the macro thing that I'm looking for right now, I don't know how long it'll be, but the macro picture, this is just my bad intuition based on limited reading of facts, is it really feels like what's going to happen moving forward is Africa, all of the African countries have been industrializing and moving towards being industrialized countries at like so much quicker than the European ones, because they're getting help from outside and because other people have already figured out the process. That when you see that continent, when those countries begin to mature and China has all of those inroads that they've already made, that China is just going to explode in more ways than they already have in terms of like being like a world leader in influence. And that, I guess it
watch
hurts.
this space.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the conversation. Phil Gurski.
Anytime.
Do you want to link your Twitter or?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm on @BorealisSaves. So Borealis as in Northern Lights, @BorealisSaves. And you can find me, borealisrisk@gmail.com. My website is borealisthreatandrisk.com. I have all my blogs and podcasts there, as well as media interviews and all kinds of interesting shit that people want to take a look at in terms of terrorism.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate the conversation.
Okay.